It's a couple minutes after, so I'll go ahead and get started, and then you can continue to put in the chat your name, your location, and who you think influences policy. My name is Kim Anderson, and this is Champions Training Using Your Voice for Change. And I just want to welcome you and tell you how excited I am that you're here today. And I'm going to start with a word of prayer, and then we can get started. Dear God, thank you for this time. Thank you for the people who are interested in using their voice to influence change. And we just ask that you can bless this time and that the words of our mouth and the meditations of our hearts will be pleasing to you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Okay, well, we're excited that you're here today and ready to take action to defend God's creation. We will be talking about some ways that you can do that today. We'll actually take an action during this call and set you up for taking action in the future. And we'll also learn a little bit about some of the topics or the ways you might want to take action today, what's going on in our federal government. So some of you have already done this, but if you could just take a minute to share in the chat your name, your location, and who you believe influences policy. And Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind, can you read out some of the answers that are already there?
Yeah, thank you to everyone who put their answers in the chat. We have folks joining from all over DC, Ohio, Denver, California. And as far as who influences policy, we have people and representatives, some special interest groups, more people and representatives, organized citizens. Eric said, we can all influence policy, voters and lobbyists. So thank you everyone for putting your answers in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay. So you have answered some of the things that we said: lawmakers, other elected officials, think tanks, foundations, special interest groups, but I think most importantly, you. As a constituent, and I believe as a Christian, we have a strong voice and you understand what's important in your district. So your voice to your policymaker or to those around you can be really powerful. And so we'll talk about some of the ways that you can do that today. I just wanted to share a verse that is kind of like my theme verse, I think, for this year, something that so far I've really been going back to. But just a quick personal story. I became a Christian in high school, and part of that was influenced by my friend Esther. Esther was a name I wasn't familiar with. And as I got to know her, she shared with me the story of Queen Esther, which is just a beautiful story that we all know. But this verse is, a very famous verse, but it's just really speaking to me this year. So for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I think God has put us here in this season and is calling. If you're here, you feel called to take some kind of action, you're interested in that. So just want to give you some encouragement and remind you that God might have called you, and just to pray about the ways that God wants you to take action. We're going to talk about a lot of actions today. Sometimes it can get overwhelming, but I would just encourage you to take a step back and ask God, what are the ways He is particularly calling you? So one of the best things that you can do, Catherine Hayhoe says, to talk about climate change or to influence climate change is to talk about it. And we're going to talk about a handful of different ways that you can talk about climate change today. All of these are sharing with others and bringing awareness around why we care for God's creation. I'm going to now hand it over to Jessica Moerman, who's going to talk a little bit about policy and what's happening in our federal government and some ways that you might want to take action.
Thanks, Kim, and thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're at, or online as well if you're joining us on demand. And thank you, Kim, for just that wonderful centering, grounding, and call to action for such a time as this. It's so powerful. And again, I just want to echo Kim's thanks to each and every one of you for wanting to join us and taking action, because I do believe for in this moment, our voices and our people power is more important than ever, especially as it may feel perhaps more discouraging than ever that our voice doesn't matter. And just want to, as we are gathered here today, just to dispel that myth. The voices of constituents is more important than ever, and especially coming from our faith perspective. So thank you for joining us and taking action today. I'm going to pull up my screen, but I want to one, just share with you, and many of you may be already following the news and have a sense of this, of kind of a little bit of the lay of the land of what we're expecting in this season for our federal policy, as that's our focus here today, and opportunities on what we can speak out against in this moment, as the EEN team has been working on and kind of distilling high priority opportunities to speak into. And then after that, Kim will expertly lead you in amazing ways of how that fit exactly how God is leading and calling you to take action today. But I wanted to start us off with the group that you're amongst. Here at EEN, over the past several years, we have mobilized over 5 million fellow Christians to lift their voice, speak up, advocate for clean air, clean water, a safe climate, protecting God's creation. And so you're in good company, and doing this in a way that brings people together to heal the political and polarized divides that we see not only in our country, but in our churches and our community. That's really our heart of how can we bring people together. I'll tell you, I'm joining you here right now from a really amazing conference in Palm Beach, Florida, just about 10 minutes away from Mar-a-Lago, interestingly. But Palm Beach Atlantic University is a Christian university here in Palm Beach County that's hosting an amazing conference on faith and ecology, addressing climate and what we could do. So I'm joining you from just having spoken with them. And so I will tell you, I'm feeling excited as I'll bring that message from from this community of people gathering to learn more about what we as Christians can do in climate. I want to share with you a little bit that I presented to them on the action side of things. I want to start by grounding us in a little bit of how's the situation right now? We'll look a little bit further in the past. One thing that I shared with the students here today was that here in the US, we have been bending our carbon curve since 2007. This is good news. Again, this is a global problem. We've got to look at global emissions, but when it comes to each country doing its part, the US, we've been reducing our emissions. A large part of this, I will say, is from that switch from coal to natural gas. So a dirtier, more carbon emitting source of energy to one that is less. We have been bending this curve. We have a lot of work still to go, but we're heading in the right direction. One of the big reasons that has put us on a track, a big opportunity for us right now, came from the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act with historic investments for climate and clean energy. Many of you helped us lift up the importance of getting that legislation passed through Congress, and I want to thank you for that. And with that comes tax credits for not only industries of clean energy, clean manufacturing, but also for our own homes, of home energy efficiency, going solar on our homes, looking at air pollution mitigation, and also many important grants to help communities and help churches to do tree planting, do solarization of low-income homes, supporting our farmers to put in place sustainable agricultural practices that draw down carbon, enrich our soils with nutrients, and make them more climate resilient. A lot of good things for progress, and all together projected that with the new climate investments would help us get 2/3 of the way towards our 2030 carbon reduction goals. Now, if I was speaking to you a month ago, I would say it's never been easier to put in place climate action in your own homes and communities. But as we fast forward to where we are today, we know that many and most of these investments, tax credits, are under threat of being rolled back. Funding put on pause. That would invest in our communities. Tax credits uncertain, potentially being rolled back in Congress. And so this is a really critical moment and a hitch point of what climate action, protecting God's creation, and defending the health and lives of all God's children is going to look like for this next few years. So again, thank you for joining for a moment such as this. So, I want to kind of here at EN, we want to bring folks together for a renewed call to protect God's creation and defend the lives of God's children. And so as we look at this moment of how or what we can act upon, preserving these gains in clean energy, climate, and health are really critical. Preserving those local climate and clean energy benefits. I'm sitting here in Florida, and just presented that in just 2023 alone, these home rebates, these tax credits have invested and saved homeowners over $80 million. This is not only something to address climate, but also bringing energy savings and prosperity to our local communities, and really rooting this into, as you all can do better than anyone else, and how your own community is benefiting from this is really, really powerful. We're also going to have opportunities to engage on preventing rollbacks of new pollution safeguards that so many of you helped us advocate for strong standards and safeguards to be enacted on soot, on methane, carbon pollution, mercury, pipeline safety. These are in danger of being rolled back by the administration right now. Also supporting our public lands and our national parks. We've been working over the past several years on modernizing oil and gas leasing practices on public lands, specifically increasing royalty fees, which hadn't been increased in 100 years, as well as bonding. So those opportunities to ensure companies put up upfront investment to clean up after extraction. We've made some incredible gains in the last 4 years in this, and that's also in danger of being rolled back. So these are some opportunities you may see coming up. But also, I want to root us in as we look at lessons from the past. We also have a history of working together to advance opportunities with the first Trump administration. In the first Trump administration, we helped pass in a bipartisan fashion the Great American Outdoors Act, which invested in our national parks. And that's a foundation we can build upon. Natural climate solutions with the Trillion Trees Initiative, as well as advancing clean energy with the Clean Energy Act of 2020, which at the time was the most historic piece of national legislation for clean energy and advancing that. And so there is a foundation of where there are opportunities that, as we are working to preserve gains from the past few years, there's also opportunities to advance forward and work together. And so a couple that I see that we have the opportunity of working together for progress is one, building local resilience, solving the insurance crisis. Again, I'm sitting here from South Florida where I'm hearing a lot about that. This is something of that we're really looking into, have a lot of bipartisan interest in how climate is impacting home and business insurance and cascading effects there for affordability. For national parks, there is the reauthorization of the Great American Outdoors Act's Legacy Restoration Fund, which will be really important. Advancing natural climate solutions, especially through conservation programs in the Farm Bill for regenerative agriculture. And then also reducing global carbon emissions with market-based solutions as we look at potential bipartisan carbon border adjustments or pollution fee or tariff on foreign pollution on imported goods. So as we look at the landscape here at EN, our values of defending life, protecting God's creation, and advancing family-sustaining clean jobs, we've got a lot to work to do to preserve current gains, but also to advance progress in a bipartisan fashion. Ultimately, and this is my hope and my prayer, that as we come together and especially lift our voice as Christians and evangelicals, we have the opportunity to bridge partisan divides and create a new coalition of climate and creation champions amongst our policymakers. And so I'm going to hand it back to Kim, who will walk you through, now that you've got an idea of some of the opportunities for what. Now Kim will share with you some opportunities of how you can lift your voice. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And if you do have questions about Jessica's presentation or mine, you can put them in the chat, and we'll be saving quite a bit of time at the end to have some discussion. And like I mentioned, we're even going to take an action before we leave today. So if you're here, the title of the training is Champions Training. Many of you have probably signed up to be an EEN champion. And our champions are our go-to advocates for the health of all God's children and God's creation. When you signed up, when you sign up, if you haven't yet, there's a form that you fill out that has different topics. So various topics like climate, pollution, agriculture. I've seen some discussion in the chat about agriculture. There are a lot of topics that you can choose to be a part of, and God calls us to different things, and we can't all do everything. So you can sign up and say, these are the topics that I'm interested in. And when we have those opportunities, we'll reach out to you. Jessica shared a slide that looked very much like this, but there are levels of engagement, and she talked about state and national. But just to start kind of in the middle of that circle, as an individual or a household, you can make change. You can make decisions about, my family is trying to reduce plastic in our household and moving more towards glass and other materials that are safer. We can have an impact on our group or our church, through a church or your college campus by moving towards, like, my church has started using reusable, basically like traditional plates and cups for Sunday school instead of having things that we throw away every week. You can advocate on the local community level. Just talked to somebody the other day who's advocating with their township, and that's a way you can advocate as well. State and national, you can speak up at various committees or in Pennsylvania, we have the Department of Environmental Protection, and you could have a national or international voice. And I want to add one that I also saw in the chat, which is basically with our purchasing power or with the companies that we buy things from. You can email them and say, we wish you would stop using as much plastic, or here's a way you can be more responsible and things like that. So there are a lot of different ways that we can have influence, a lot of different levels. Our survey as new champions asks you about that. And again, we'll reach out to you when those opportunities become available. So there are some training and advocacy areas that we're going to talk about today, various ways you can take action. We're going to also share recordings throughout of trainings that we've done in the past on some of these topics, so that if you want to know more about one, you can go to that recording and learn a little bit more. And we also will be sharing the slides and the links after this training as well. So let's jump in. So first of all, with any area, you can support your story. We really believe in telling your personal story here at EEN, bringing a personal face and a personal name and a personal story to whoever you're talking to. And you can support that story by local data. These are just some examples, but I'll give a couple. The American Lung Association every year has a state of the air report where you can look at your county or down to your, or up to your state. And then also sometimes they'll have like a region, like, they'll put a group of cities that are near each other together and give it a grade based on soot pollution or air quality and things like that. So bringing that and saying, we have somebody on staff who's in Cleveland, and Cleveland has historically regularly been at the top of the asthma capitals, which means that it's a hard place for people with asthma to live because of the pollution that exists there. So bringing these stories. So Dean on our staff talks about his wife and his son who have asthma, and then shares that statistic to back it up, and then to talk about why we care about God's creation. And so that's just one way you can advocate. So one way you can do that is through social media. You can share your story on social media. We have some toolkits. Lindsay's going to share one on extreme weather in the chat, but we make them for various topics where you can go out there, and we might have suggested posts that you could make or links you could include and things like that. If you write an op-ed or a letter to the editor, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can then share the link to that if it gets published, and then your friends and family will see it. If you think about it, the people that are on social media are people that you know in one way or another and have an influence on. And so social media is kind of a good way that you can share with other people. You can also follow EEN and YECA on social media and then share the posts that we make. And then you can also share your story and your values. And also you can tag policymakers. So if you write a letter to the editor and it relates to something that your policymaker locally might care about, you can tag them so that they or their staff see it. The more that you can get your voice out, the better. Next, we have meeting with your policymakers on a local or a state or a federal level. One of the best ways to make an influence is to sit down with your policymaker or their office and talk to them about what you care about. Share what matters to you. As somebody who lives in that state or district, you know what's important to you and to those around you. And so sitting down and sharing that with your policymaker can have a big impact. And we encourage you to think long term. The goal is to build a relationship and then to continue talking to them so that you can have an influence over time. And it's never been easier. You can meet virtually. Many of these offices, most of the offices will meet with you virtually. And that way you don't have to travel somewhere, or take time out of your day beyond just the time that it takes to meet. And EEN can come alongside you and help you prepare for those conversations. And again, there is an additional training on this. If you would like to learn more, we have a training that we did last summer that you can tune into to learn more about meeting with your policymakers. Next is writing for change. First of all, you can fill out an action alert, which we have a website or a part of our website that has action alerts out there all the time. So you can fill out those action alerts, and those will go, it's a wonderful system. It'll go directly, you put in your address and it pulls up your policymaker for you and sends the action alert to them. You can edit the text to make it more personal. So that's one way that you can write for change. You can also write to your local paper, either through a letter to the editor, which are usually shorter letters, like 150 to 250 words, depending on the paper, or an op-ed, which is longer, 600 to 800 words. We have a link that we'll share in the chat about helping you to find a paper that's near you if you don't, maybe you're new to your area, so you can find an appropriate paper. There are sometimes publications that are more national as well, that depending on your message might be willing to share things as well. And then again, once you've published it, go ahead and share it on social media. Next, you can educate your church community. If you're a pastor, on our website, we have resources for sermon starters. If you're not a pastor, or if you are, but you want to start a book club, we have a suggested list of books. We have, for some of those books, we have a discussion guide. We have a couple of churches right now in Ohio, which are leading a study on garbage theology, and wonderful book that I highly recommend. But we do have a toolkit for that book and others where you can lead a discussion and meet with people in your church. I want to share an idea that my pastor did a few years ago, was share the video Minimalism, which is a documentary on Netflix, and it's not Christian based, but it just kind of started a conversation in our church about how much we use today and how much of that ends up in garbage dumps and things like that. So that's just an easy way that you can invite people to come watch a film, and then it kind of just starts a discussion. And then we also have ideas for Bible studies. And then we also have some leader guides for films. We've got some documentaries out there. And then we also have regenerative agriculture webinars, including one coming up next week that you could be a part of, and then potentially share some of that with your church as well. Next, you can give a testimony. Sometimes the EPA or another agency will have an opportunity for public testimony, usually anytime on a state or federal level. Even locally, when there's a new rule, they're required to have public testimony to hear public comment. So you can testify before a committee, and usually you have 3 to 5 minutes to share your information in a few hundred words, and that can have a big impact on influencing a specific piece of policy that is proposed. And again, we live in an age where very often this is now virtual. Historically, you might have to drive to DC or to your regional office or something for those testimonies, but nowadays, very often these are held virtually, so you can do it from your office or the comfort of your living room, and it can have a big impact when those rules are proposed. And again, we can reach out when we have opportunities to do that kind of testimony in the future. I want to share another personal story. Had a lot of conversations with my husband recently about, what's happening in the world. And my husband tends to be a little cynical, as do I. But my husband, even knowing what I do, says, I just don't know that we can make a difference. I don't know that we can have much of an impact. And honestly, looking at the chat today, I feel like a lot of people feel like that. We think that lobbyists or billionaires have an impact, and little me sitting in Western Pennsylvania might not. But I can tell you from story after story that we hear at EEN that you can have an impact. I'm going to tell a story of our friend Jack at Vineyard Columbus in Ohio. Some of you might have heard this story before, but it's just so powerful, I like to share it. Jack, a couple years ago, testified at a public hearing before the EPA, I believe, on the methane rule. And then we took his testimony and helped him turn it into a letter to the editor, to his local paper, where it was published. And then his senator read it and wrote him a personal note by hand, thanking him for taking the time to make a difference in our world. So Jack took one action, a public testimony, turned it into LTE, and then had his policymaker read it, and then he also shared it on social media. So just on one topic, he was able to touch a number of these without a whole bunch of work, and had an impact. We also hear stories that in offices, the staff of the senator, the representative, will take notes. We'll kind of have a tick sheet of, we got a call about this, for or against it. They listen. They will say to us in meetings, we're hearing from our constituents, blah, blah, blah. Yes, there are a lot of voices out there that might not be sharing the same message as you, but that's all the more reason why we need to go en masse to have these conversations. It's just very powerful when we all kind of go together and share our stories. So we're going to give you an opportunity to do this now. That will take just a couple of moments. The number at the top will go to a switchboard, and you can call that phone number and then read this script. And this is to some of the things Jessica was talking about, asking your representative or your senator or both to take seriously the biblical mandate for God's creation and care for the health of those around you. So I'm going to give you guys like 3 minutes. You can go off screen to make your phone call, read the script, mention that you're a constituent, where you live, and you may talk to a person, you might get a recording, but this is something that time after time people tell us this is a simple action that you can take, and we'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. I'll go off screen, allow you to do the same, and then we can come back in a couple of minutes. Okay, well, I apologize. That took a little bit longer because my office had a long voicemail ahead of me leaving a voicemail, but I hope that you guys all enjoyed that. I'm gonna open it up now to kind of find out how you felt about that. If anybody wants to go off mute and share how they felt making that phone call, we would love to hear your feedback and your experience. You could also share it in the chat as well. Okay, well, we have a quiet group today, but we often hear from people that they feel empowered when they make phone calls like that. Many people say they've never done it before, and this is just a quick, 2-minute way that you can take action. If you didn't feel comfortable doing that right now, we'll be sending the slides out later, and you can feel free to make those phone calls later. I only got to do one of my senators, so I will take some time later to talk to my representative and my other senator's office as well. So moving on, if you have not yet signed up to be a Creation Care champion, there's a QR code that you can use there to do so. And if you have, we'll be reaching out to you when we have opportunities that come up. And we also, you can sign up for our newsletter. When you sign up, you'll be putting your email address in, and we'll reach out when we have opportunities. We have a wealth of experience and knowledge on this call and in our community, and I just love that, some of you know a lot about regenerative agriculture, and we've learned a little bit about that today, and we've learned about wolves and things that were not on the agenda that I didn't expect to talk about, that shows your care for God's creation. So we really appreciate you being here today. We're at the end of the hour, but if you have questions about anything, you can feel free to reach out. I will put my email in the chat, and we can follow up later if you have any additional questions. I'm going to go ahead and close it in prayer. Jessica, do you have any closing thoughts before we go?
Oh, Kim, you've said it all. Again, it's so wonderful to be in community with you. I'm inspired by you all, and our heart really is to make it as easy as possible for you to lift your voice and make the impact that you want to do. So always welcome how we can better resource you in doing that. And Jeff, you sparked a wonderful idea. I'd love for a series of favorite Bible verses on creation care from each of you, our champions. So that's something I'd love to see at some point, but I'm going to hand it back to Kim. But thank you all so much for joining us. This work would not be possible without you. We are grateful.
Yes, and I know this has given me hope. It's been, the last few months have been a little frustrating for various reasons, but you guys have given me hope, and I hope this has given you hope as well, that you can carry in and that you'll be mobilized to take action this week and into the future. So I will just close us in prayer. Dear God, I just thank you for each of the people on this call or listening to the recording. We just thank you for whatever it is that you have called them to. We thank you for the unique knowledge and experiences and interests of the people on this call and in our community. And we just ask that you will help mobilize people for such a time as this. Thank you for being a God who calls us and who asks us to do things, and just give us the wisdom and the power and the courage to take action. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you all. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and you can feel free to reach out if you have any questions in the future. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.